Welcome to the Rethink Leadership podcast with me, Jeremy Blaine. I interview leaders, experts and business professionals from around the world who are bringing leadership principles and know-how into the digitally driven 21st century workplace, with focus firmly on the how-to rather than the what. Each episode is in aid of a charity chosen by my guests, and since 2020, we've made donations to over 80 global and local causes. Welcome to this episode of the Rethink Leadership podcast with my guest, Nic Marks, who is a statistician, speaker and author who pioneered the field of workplace well-being. Nic's a sought-after international speaker, and in fact his TED Talk has been viewed millions of times, and his TEDBook A Happiness Manifesto helped put measuring national well-being on the global agenda. Today, as founder of Friday Pulse, he helps organisations improve team happiness through science-led feedback. Nic's work sits at the intersection of statistics, psychology and systems thinking. He brings evidence, empathy and optimism to his mission to make happiness at work something we can all take seriously. His new book, Happiness is a Serious Business, explores why happy teams perform better and how leaders can build the conditions for people and organisations to thrive. This episode is in aid of Médecins Sans Frontières, Doctors Without Borders, to which we've made a donation as a thank you to Nic for joining us. This magnificent organisation continues to support those in war zones, trauma, and in medical need everywhere. Nic, thanks very much for joining me. Please introduce yourself, your specialisms, and as a pioneer in workplace well-being and happiness, tell us about that new book of yours, Happiness is a Serious Business.
Yeah, I'm a statistician by trade, so that's sort of always been my theme. I was that really annoying guy at school that was top of maths without trying. And over the years, I started to specialize in quality of life and then into people's experience of life. And that led me into well-being and then ultimately into happiness at work. So I sort of take a empirical view to, perspective on it, but try and make it really easy to understand. So my book, Happiness is a Serious Business, of course, I have a copy just here, is just came out. And basically it's my take on what team happiness is, how you can track it, understand it and improve it.
Great. So there's a couple of questions for me immediately off the bat from what you just said there. So the first one, I'm just going to go into that leaders and teams. So why do leaders particularly need to wake up to organisational or team happiness, especially in the current environment where there's so much change? We hear about fatigue, much more conscious of mental health, etc.
Yeah, I mean, happiness gets to the root of all that without sort of getting depressingly, fatigued or well-being oriented. So sometimes the word well-being can sound really quite flat and like, oh my God, if I ask you about your well-being, you're going to tell me everything that's wrong. And actually happiness creates a more positive tone on that. And when we feel happy, when things are going well, we feel happy. And so that's a really, really important gauge for organizations and leaders to know, how are your teams doing? Well, if you ask them how happy they are, you've got that immediately. The second thing is that it's very linked to our energy. When we feel good, we do good work. And so that's just a natural biological process, what's going on here. We don't naturally ask people, how is your well-being? Actually, we say, how are you doing? How are you feeling? And so when you get an emotionally toned word in response to that, that's much stronger. It's much more natural to us. So ultimately, I'm saying to team leaders and people leaders that happiness is where the magic is. Team happiness is where people's motivation is. It's where their creativity, their collaboration is. So that's why it's so important. It's also just simple language to use with people.
Yes, it is. And that links quite nicely to what you said about your primary role, how you've grown up, this statistician, the one who was always top of maths, and I was always at the bottom of maths, I must confess right here. And leaders will turn and say, well, that's all very well, but how do we measure it? But you are a statistician. So how do you put data at the heart of this journey in improving happiness and well-being in the workplace for teams? And why is that so important for those customers that you work with?
So how do you measure happiness? People always think, oh yeah, you can't measure the happiness. It's so ethereal, it's intangible. Well, actually, you can create measures of happiness if we want to distinguish about it, really. So what I ask people typically in surveys, in pulse surveys, is how happy were you at work last week? And by making it specifically at work, that gives a context to it. By making it time bound, it makes it much easier to answer. So if I say, how happy are you at work in general, you start, jiggling quite a lot of things. Were you happy this week? Yeah, I was. Oh, no, I wasn't. It's a terrible week. And you get a really clean answer. And if people can immediately give you an answer, and as a statistician, particularly what's called subjective data, if they give you an immediate answer, then it's going to be more robust because it's more aligned to actually how they feel. So that's how you measure. And then what you get if you have weekly happiness is you get really interesting time trends. You immediately see if teams are struggling because they've had a dip. And the classic piece of data that shows that is actually if you track weekly happiness in the UK during COVID, where it absolutely plummeted. And extraordinarily, YouGov were conducting what they called the mood of the nation from mid-2019. And so they captured the whole real time of it. And you see basically, like we had waves of hospitalization and cases, you see an inverse wave of unhappiness in the UK. And that's the power of it, because it's a very simple metric. It's very, very relatable to people. It says something real, and you can improve it. So it's...
Yeah, I like that. For me, I wrote the term that's out of the weeds measurement, because you're so right. When you said it, I realized what you meant, because if I went to a team member today and say, how are you doing in that project? How are you feeling about that? How are you feeling about this today? How are you feeling that today? You're getting all of these different metrics sort of coming in at once. But if you're just reflecting back in general, then it's had time to probably embed a little bit internally, and they can better come back to you. Am I right with that?
Yeah, I mean, the time bound bit is really important, because if you ask people, you can just about ask people how happy you were this month. We just about remember that long. But after that, you're just into a sort of general feeling, which is not bad, but it's not going to be as responsive and dynamic. And what I'm actually interested is in creating indicator tools for people leaders that can give them real-time information on their teams. So that's why it becomes time-bound. I mean, you could do it on specific projects. You would get different information. If you were doing a one-to-one with somebody and they're working across multiple projects, then you would want to be identifying which one they're enjoying more, because that's where their strengths will lie. I mean, when people feel energetic, they tend to be using their strengths, playing to their strengths, doing their best work. So you probably do want to know that. And if if a person's managing multiple projects for someone, they want to be making sure they're getting enough of what they love, that they've got energy across the thing. So you can think of happiness as like as a barometer of people's energy. Yeah.
Yeah, a barometer of people's energy. I like that. That's excellent stuff. So I'm going to put you on the spot now, Nic.
Okay.
You don't have to name names, but I'd love some examples of organizations or industries that are getting workplace happiness or this well-being and the way they're engaging employees right, and what are the upsides that they're experiencing?
Yeah, we obviously work with a lot of clients. I mean, mainly SMEs, some larger organizations. And in fact, some of the larger organizations we probably had the best results for. We sell a platform, Friday Pulse, and SMEs find it easier to buy than larger organizations because of procurement and all sorts of other issues. And however, when we've worked with larger organizations, they're actually the ones with a lot of teams sort of stuck in okay. So I often talk about there's a danger of being stuck in okay. So when you've got happy teams, they're going forward. If they're unhappy, something's going to change, because unhappiness is actually characterized by energy too, but it's energy to change, to disrupt, to destroy. Whereas okay is total absence of energy, and I always say, okay isn't really okay. That's where your upside is really, in terms of performance, creativity, collaboration, all those sort of things. It's from okay to happy, and we see in large organizations, a lot more teams that are stuck in it, because the scale of larger organizations is sort of less human scale, so you get a bit lost in it, and actually our emotions and feelings are very proximal. They're very much to do with what we're doing in everyday life. So the journey for larger organizations is to create smallness in the bigness, and how to do that, and how to break things down to team and division size, that they become more human scale. People feel more empowered in their work, if you want to call it like that. And so, so larger organizations we work with, I mean, like one we've been working with, 8-9 years, and they've seen their staff turnover fall by 25% over that time. I mean, 25% from their level, not 25% altogether. So, there's real savings if you get things right. And they've also been growing and presumably getting more productive. I don't have data on their productivity because we're a relatively light survey tool. They do lots of things, but I can see who leaves and who doesn't because they come and fall out of our list. So I can measure staff turnover. I don't know whether they're good or bad leave. I don't know whether they've been made redundant or not, but I can see the figures that are falling. And other clients that we worked for a long time, we've had similar journeys, where they've sort of worked out that they're a bit flat. And it doesn't happen overnight. You can't just suddenly switch a switch on and teams become happier. It is about improving people's week-to-week work. That's where the work is. There's a poet, Anna Dillon, a writer, and she says, "How we spend our days is how we spend our lives." And I think it's the same at work. How we spend our days at work is how our work is. How we spend our weeks at work. We can get this sort of grandiose idea about career paths and tracks, and they are, we do need to keep an eye on development. But ultimately, the experience of work is in our weekly flow.
Yeah, and that leads me directly to say, well, I'm not sure if it's a mirror image exactly, but for those that aren't focused on this, through the data that you have, what are the impacts that it has immediately on the organization when they've sort of neglected well-being, this happiness index, the barometer of happiness, if you like?
Well, they have to implement much more than the measurement. I sometimes say that, actions speak louder than measurement. I can put the measurement in. That's, it's not entirely non-trivial, but it's straightforward. But what they've got to do is get people to act on the insights. And so I created a methodology for our clients, which I call measure, meet, repeat. So we do a measurement. They need to meet about it, do some changes. They repeat that. And that cycle can go weekly. It can go monthly. It can go quarterly. Annually is a bit, we do some clients still annual surveys because we used to offer them years ago. They're legacy clients. We still do them with them. And they do make improvements if they do it properly, but it is all down to the actions that they take. So if they embed a culture where they take team happiness, team well-being seriously, then it's really linked to productivity. It's really linked to staff retention. It's really linked to reducing burnout. These are really three big gains that organizations make, and they're kind of the flip side is the risk that if they don't take it, team happiness, team experience seriously, they're going to have underperformance, high staff turnover, and higher burnout. So, and there's a real business issues that cost a lot. By my estimates, a happier team is 20 to 30% more productive. And that's across all industries. Where you get to jobs and roles that are more creative, more collaborative, more customer focused, the gains of happiness are even more.
Intuitively, I get that, but 20 to 30% is huge.
It is huge. I almost sometimes feel embarrassed how big it is. But I mean, that is from unhappy to happy. So if you want to go from okay to happy, it's 10 to 15%. But that is huge. And staff turnover is even bigger effect. So the unhappy leave 3 or 4 times more next quarter. The okay leave 50, 60% more. So there's really killing you. And I think people can ignore it because it always feels a bit like undiagnosable why people are going. But actually, if you're measuring team happiness seriously, it is diagnosable.
And a related question, actually, it just popped into my head, Nic. What's the relationship, therefore, with evolving company or team culture?
Yeah, culture it always feels a little mysterious. What is culture? And it's quite difficult to find a good definition. There's one I quite like, which is the way we do things around here, which I think is quite a classic one. So it's definitely linked to behavior. I think culture, it's not just values on a wall, it's actually what people do. I define a great culture as being one that enables people and teams to be happy and successful. They need to be both of those things. If they are successful but not happy, they're burning out. If they're happy but not successful, they're going out of business. That's no good. You need the two together. So that's what I think are great. Because as a statistician, I like to define it by its outcomes. And then I look at the drivers of it. So most people, when they talk about great cultures, they start saying, okay, well, it's a culture where people respect each other, where they do this. And that's all fine. But what's the outcome from that? Well, the outcome is that teams are happier and more successful. So what I do with my stats is then I look at the drivers. And so I come up with 5 big drivers of team culture, which are connect, be fair, empower, challenge, and inspire. And that's not dissimilar from Maslow. It's not dissimilar from Daniel Pink or other people. It shouldn't be. We're all talking about the same thing. The difference I try and do is make them positive actions that team leaders can understand easily. How does my team connect more? Are we treating people fairly? Are we empowering them? Are we challenging them, which always surprises people? But actually, happiness is about being stretched as well. We like to strive, we like to feel goals, achieve goals. I think sometimes we can get ourselves in a mess with the well-being agenda, that it's all about support, and and that's important. Psychological safety is important. It's an absolute baseline. But if people want to feel good, they've got to rise too. So you want that. And inspire is the last one. That's another rising one. So the challenge and the inspire ones are the rising, the empowering is the doing, and the connecting and being fair is kind of the safety and the sort of stability.
Well, you've referred to a lot of the rich sort of research that you've got behind this. So let's just go into that a little bit further. So you founded the Centre of Wellbeing at the New Economics Foundation, to tackle these sort of areas, there's well-being, but mainly that core around happiness. So just tell us a little bit more about that and how you do it and how it benefits your clients.
Yeah, so actually, New Economics Foundation was the role I did through the 2000s, which was about well-being and public policy. So New Economics Foundation was a think tank. I started my work on well-being there, and it was kind of unexpectedly successful. It started as a volunteer job, grew into an award-winning team, ended up advising the Blair and Cameron governments how to measure well-being, and I eventually did a TED talk on it in 2010. And then after that, I started thinking, policy is very slow-moving and yet quite removed from the impact. And I thought I'd like to do something with the next 10, 15 years of my career, which is more impactful. So I decided to choose work, and because I was just as critical about how organizations measured employee experience as I was governments measured population well-being. So I took those skills and put them into creating a business and mainly a platform for measuring and improving team happiness. But it's taken me, it took me sort of 7-8 years really to get a good methodology that I felt really comfortable, which is that measure meet methodology. It's got a lot of science behind it. And then I thought, okay, I better write a book now. And that's taken me 2 or 3 years. And now I'm really interested in embedding this in organizations, and probably larger ones than I've worked with. I think that, like I've started some work with an NHS trust, and they are just so thirsty for this because they are fatigued and worn down, and they are decent, caring people, and perhaps they're not caring for their people enough. And actually, how do they do that whilst also driving performance? I think this is to find the alignment. What I'm really excited about this work is that there is an alignment between people's happiness and well-being needs and the business goals. It's what's also, as someone who's an applied researcher, is super interested in, is that the outcomes that you want to improve are very close to the mood. So you can look at, sales operators' mood this week, how much they've sold. That's statistically beautiful, but it's also really important performance-wise, because you can see that impact. And you start knowing that actually, if your salespeople feel good, they do get good sales figures, it makes you understand why you need to look after team happiness.
Yeah, I understand that. And as you're talking, I'm going to just bring in another question, if that's okay, around individuals and environment, the environment where we find ourselves in. I just looking at you and nodding away, and then I noticed your bookshelf behind you, and I saw the orange books, the yellow books, the blue books, way neater than mine as well, which are all higgledy-piggledy. And I'm kind of thinking, right, okay, so what role does environment play in happiness for individuals, and therefore how do individuals manage their own happiness as well and start flagging it or doing something about it when they know that they're going on a downtail?
So we are individuals, but we are deeply relational. And so particularly our social environment is hugely, hugely important on us. The broader environment is too. The bookshelves is courtesy of my wife, who is an artist, and she said, "Oh, you should put your book." Well, actually, we've only been together 10 years, right? We're not a first marriage. And the first time I walked into her sitting room, her books were all color coded, and I was like, "What? Are they not done by subject?" But bless her, she knows exactly what color each book is. That's just how her brain works. And so when we were doing this, she said, "Oh, you should make your backdrop like this." So it's just for the aesthetic of it. It's rather beautiful, and I do now know where the books are. But environment does play a role. So we know that people who work in offices with windows actually are happier at work if they use plants. So there are absolutely effects of this. There's a lot of data on it in hospitals about recovery time if you've got windows and plants and things like that. So when environments look rubbish, crime is also related, number of trees in estates. So these are important factors. But what's even more important is the social environment. And so at work, there's a lot of emphasis on personal well-being. There's very little on teams. And actually, I would say one of the big insights from my book, I've got a chapter on it at the end, which I say is that I think organizations should appoint heads of team experience. I don't think they should appoint chief happiness officers. I think that sounds gimmicky, right? Health and well-being, physical health is important, but teams is really where it is at. And I can even see that in my data. So there's a statistical analysis you can do. It's called multi-level analysis. And basically you look at the individual, the first group they're in, which is a team, the second group in the organization, and then you could look at sector and all sorts of things. But if you look at that, then the team is 3 times more important for shaping their experience than the organization. So the old adage that people join organizations and leave managers kind of comes out in the data. But what I would say is that is an organizational failure because they are not supporting their managers. They're not helping them be consistent. They're not promoting them for people skills, which are not soft. They are essential, but it shows how important the team milieu is for it. There is still a lot down to the individual. So if I look at my data and I'm looking at the difference in happiness between people, I probably got 50-60% of the variance, which is individual rather than group. But that is still not just about the individual that they can change. Some of it's going to be genetic for them. They're going to be positive, negative people. Some of it is going to be their home life spilling into where they are. And then the rest is going to be about role fit and about how they're doing in that and how they're supported with that. So there can be people within the same team who are happy and unhappy. That can happen. It's just more of them aligning. So there's a lot of complexity going on. So there is absolutely some responsibility for individuals, but the environment more broadly shapes us more than we think it does.
Yeah, I was thinking that as you were talking before, there are a number of factors, but ultimately where it really comes into focus in organizations is at team level, which I really get. We started this by talking about leaders and talking about leaders really needing to understand this a little bit more. So for those tuning in, Nic, what 2 or 3 actions can leaders take now to create some early wins around workplace happiness and the broader well-being of their teams?
Yeah, I always recommend something really, really simple, that one of the best ways of building a happy team is to reduce friction in their work and increase flow, if you take an engineering analogy. And the way that you put that into action is every Monday morning, have a meeting and ask everybody in your team, what went well last week for you? What was a success for you? And so start with those positives and celebrate them, because too often at work, we go from one challenge to the next. We don't stop and pause, but actually take time to recognize what's going well and build on that, because what's going well is the strengths of your team, and you want to grow that more. And it also creates a really nice atmosphere if you just take time and shout out good performance, and you do that systematically, consistently, I don't know, every week. Yeah, that's really, really important. And when you've done that, then also the second thing you should ask is what's holding you back, what's frustrating you, what's the friction. You must do the good things first. Don't start with the frictions. You'll have a really different team meeting if you start with what's going wrong. Everyone will go down, the mood will go down. Start with what's going well. Get people to feel good. It's a very simple thing. We like being appreciated. Our shoulders go back. We feel better. Okay. Then you've got the right mood to tackle any challenges you've got. So deal with that every week. So those are the 2 questions you should ask every week. What's going well? With the idea, how do we build on it? What's not going well? How do we tackle it? And then you want to introduce a culture of appreciation. And a culture of appreciation is, yes, celebrating those things, but is encouraging everyone to thank colleagues when they support them, to shout out each other peer to peer. For you, if you're a team leader, who's your leader? Thank them for how they're supporting. Thank upwards. Very rarely do people thank upwards. We thank downwards. Thank upwards, because they've got a difficult job too. So really, really saying thank you, appreciate. It's such a simple thing. So many people don't get thanked at work. I've had emails because we've got a thank you little feature in our thing, where you can send a thank you note to somebody in your team or outside of your team. And I've had people say, I've never been thanked at work before. And you think, that's madness. And so doing that. So those are the weekly things. And then one-to-ones. I think a lot of team leaders are frightened about asking about people's emotional experience. They haven't been promoted for people skills. They've been promoted for technical skills. It all feels a bit of a Pandora's box that you could open. And I get that. And it's really important. So I say that, probably the best way to think about how approaching them is to think of yourself first as a mirror, which is that listening to them. And listening isn't just nodding. Actually say back what you're hearing, because we can often not actually hear it exactly right. So if we say back what we're hearing, if you get it wrong, they won't mind. They will just correct you. And the second iteration will get you to what they want to hear. Say, oh, you're saying this. And then, oh, no, I don't quite mean that. I mean that. It helps them see for themselves. It helps you understand it. But then the second thing is, don't stop at being a mirror, then become a window, which you look out into the world and you can see and you can show them where they could go. This is the support and challenge. The mirror is like the window. You're understanding where they are. It's like the mirror is like the support, sorry. And the window is like the challenge. Oh, well, we could do this. And I think it's really, really important. And to be light. Don't expect yourself to be the world's best coach straight away, but just do that. Listen, be human. Open up the possibilities. We are at work. You're not their therapist. Okay. Just as, we have got work to do. There are business goals to achieve. We need to be on track with that. Sometimes people don't fit in the role. You're probably doing both of you a service if they move to something else, but actually helping people know where the track is, know where the goal is, and how we get there is part of the job. And listening to them is the start of that. So those are the two big things. Those two questions: what's going well, what isn't. Get a culture appreciation in the one-to-ones. Think of yourself as like a mirror and a window.
Yeah, and I like the analogy of the friction and the flow as well.
Yes.
Within that, and how that can work. I really get that. Well, I have a full page of notes here. I'm absolutely sure those tuning in have too. And sadly, we've come to the end of our conversation. So, Nic, how do people find out more about what you're doing? How do they get hold of your book, Happiness is a Serious Business? And how do they continue the conversation with you?
Yeah, so, Happiness is a Serious Business on Amazon. It was, bestseller in its first couple of weeks, which is good. And then I'm on LinkedIn is the easiest place to find me. Nic, no K, Nic Marks. NicMarks.org is my website, and FridayPulse.com is the platform that I designed that basically operationalizes all of this systematically through organizations. So that's really things. And I'm doing, keynotes, online talks and masterclasses, particularly with larger organizations. Masterclasses work well. They don't want to go straight to a measurement tool. So that's what I'm in the market for.
Great. Well, Nic Marks, thanks very much for joining me.
Thank you.
Thanks for tuning in to the Rethink Leadership podcast with me, Jeremy Blaine. Please like, comment and support us on your favourite platform, and subscribe to our YouTube channel where you can watch as well as listen to each episode.